Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today we are going to flash back to my very first traumatic exposure to anime and analyze the complex history and philosophy that went into the crafting of Miyazaki's brutal and beautiful masterpiece. Just kidding, fans. This is the spoiler-free review of the Jedi Season 2, Episode 5, or Chapter 13 of The Mandalorian. However, it seems to have become a tradition for me to start out these reviews by pointing out what classic cinematic story the creators are calling on to flavor their offering of the week. And while other episodes have drawn on classic live-action films, this one straight up riffs off of one of the most famous and popular animated movies in modern geek culture. This is not a retelling of Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, but it is darn sure set in the same world. We have your feral child in the depleted forest, the giant otherworldly beasts that roam through the mists, giving great mournful calls through the fog. Not only the main villain, but all of her minions are a direct visual one-for-one match to the main cast of antagonists in Princess Mononoke. But the visual is really where the similarities end here. The episode is a masterclass in building suspense. From one moment to the next, you are never sure what is going to happen. The creators drop hints that many things will happen. Most of these hints are contradictory, and so you're literally just on the edge of your seat waiting for the final shoe to drop. To give one non-spoilery example, there is a secondary character who is introduced with an odd two-beat theme. From the clues, you are not sure if he is a straight-up villain, an impartial participant who is only on one side or the other because he was hired to be, or an ally who is simply waiting his chance to reveal his loyalty and betray the people he appears to be working for. Right up till the moment the issue is resolved, you aren't sure if he's an enemy or an ally. Now, let's talk about my 4 moments of disappointment, because I did have a few disappointments in this, one of which I was expecting, and a couple of which were kind of surprising. The first is the same it's been for all of these episodes. Some of Din's lines just feel phoned in, flat, stilted, which makes absolutely no sense at all because they are so tightly packed between moments of extreme acting where this beautiful man is emoting fantastically through subtle vocal shifts. I don't know why this is happening. Now, it's really starting to get me irritated because I can't tell what's going on. Option 1 is that the voice actor is just falling flat on certain lines. This is possible. As much as we love him, no actor is perfect in their craft, and with Pedro being so good when he is good, it might just make us feel it more when he's just average. On the other hand, this might again just be the law of diminishing returns. Maybe the emotional highs and lows of the show are so strong that any voice line that's not stirring our emotion just feels a little bit flat by comparison. This problem, the audience getting used to highs and not being satisfied with anything else afterwards, is a running problem through most shows and is the kind of thing that leads to power creep in other genres. And on another hand, this might be a deliberate choice to show that Din is shutting down emotionally when faced with intense negative emotions, that he's swinging between his desperate attempts to maintain control of himself in a situation that's rapidly spinning out of his control and his natural emotional responses to those reactions. I theorized in a previous video that this might be the show recognizing how much blunt force trauma Din has taken to his head, and is setting up that he is actually suffering consequences from his multiple concussions, which would be awesome, but cinematic history suggests people just don't have concussions in most of cinema unless it's a medical drama, and even then it's fairly poorly portrayed. But if Din is suffering actual physical damage from getting his head knocked around, that would explain it. So, let me know in the comments why you think that random lines of Din sound flat and stilted. My second nitpick really isn't a nitpick because I don't see it as a flaw in the episode itself. There's nothing wrong with the episode, but for a moment it did feel wrong. Taking any character or any situation from animated to live action is always jarring. See, the difference between animation and live action, one of the reasons people on Spectrum like animated so much is that it's simplified, it's low resolution. You can get away with showing things that you couldn't in live action because it's not the thing, it's just a low resolution representation of it. But when you take that and translate it into live action, you have to deal with the reality, the high resolution reality, adding in details that your brain is not ready to accept into your mental picture of it. So my brain did whine a little now in previous episodes when Bogatan showed up and I had to transition from her being animated to her being live action, but that passed fairly quickly, in part because her animated character looks so much like the actress that there wasn't much difference, but mostly because I had no real emotional attachment to the character's face. There was no real emotional, but however, in this episode there's no emotional distance to cushion the shock, and it wasn't until nearly the end of the episode that my brain had finally accepted the change and allowed me to enjoy watching the new, now live action character. That being said, I am on the spectrum, admittedly, and detest change in nearly every form for the first 48 hours of experiencing it. After that, I'm good and I can actually judge my opinion, but I don't give my opinions on whether I like something or not, usually in the first 48 hours, because I have to wait for the shock of change to wear off. I went into this experience expecting to have to wait at least 2 days before I could really enjoy the episode. It really says something that the artist managed to capture the feel of the animated series so closely that it only took a quarter of an hour to bring my stubborn heart to heal and accept the element of the show for what it was. Ah, Krat Spit, I could just kiss Favreau right now. I love this show. Now, the only real true disappointment was that nothing came out of the dark and ominous waters to eat the main villain at the end. I was really looking forward to an evil koi, if not a proper alien alligator, bursting out of the dark waters to chomp off her arm. Very specifically, that scenario. But it didn't happen. This episode does make me wonder a bit if the Loth wolves from Rebels were based off the wolves from Princess Mononoke. I fully expected one of them to pop up here and give a good old-fashioned Star Wars-style amputation to the main villain. The last quibble was just the very first combat scene is kind of... It feels choreographed. I think I know what they were going for, ghostly movements in the fog versus flashy direct combat, but it just felt stiff and directed to me, as opposed to how fluid most of the combat scenes have felt up to now. Again, however, do not think for one moment this episode isn't amazing. I literally squealed like a little fangirl at one point. There are at least half a dozen moments in this episode where you do not know which way fate will fall. You spend the entire runtime on painful tenterhooks. The emotions are strong with this one. Your heart is ready to break as you watch Din and the child interact. In fact, your emotions are in such a knot that you can barely even notice the times when the episode drops loads of lore and information, which it does. There is a lot of stuff in here that this show handles and just complex arguments that it brushes aside with literally a word. Now, for all of the questions that it answered, however, this episode raised a huge number of questions in my mind. If you are watching this show without the backstory of Rebels and Clone Wars, you can kind of stop listening now because this isn't going to make sense. But it was still going to be a cool episode, and now you know the name of the big bad. Such fun, so much amazing. But if you have the backstory of Rebels and Clone Wars, it raises a huge question. A question about the source of the M-count material Dr. Pershing used in the experiments. Now, when we watched that scene where the recording of Dr. Pershing played, I noticed that it was worded very, very carefully so that it did not necessarily refer to the child. If you go back and listen, it could refer to the child or another source of M-counts. Now, given that the child is the only source of a high M-count blood that we've seen in the series, we assumed it was the child. But please do remember these two things. At the start of the season, Baby Yoda was not in the hands of the Imperial Remnant, and we have no evidence that he ever was. In the previous episode, Dr. Pershing very carefully never referred to the source of the high M count in any way that could directly tie it to Baby Yoda, leaving the admittedly faint possibility that they were getting their high M count material from another source, and Baby Yoda was just their latest acquisition, an attempt to fix the fact that their donor had escaped. Now, let's do some storytelling math. If you add up all the factors to solve for the missing variable, it will go something like this. Call this fictional algebra. Add the character who shows up in this episode to what the character was doing the last time we saw them in the previous series, to who the character is looking for now, to who was last seen with the character being looked for right now. The missing variable is in fact someone who has a high M count of their own who is not Baby Yoda. What if the source of the donations, at least most of them, certainly the ones they did most of the experiments with, was this missing person? What if we are going to get an episode where this missing variable gets to show up and help or receive help from our beloved Mando? So, what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Will we be getting our precious blueberry back? Am I way off base? Will any of you admit to squealing like the other little fangirls and boys that we are? Leave a like if you agree and a comment dismembering my arguments like a Miyazaki villain if you have an idea of your own. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.